We are going to share with you now some comments about Philip's life from the limited perspective of his mother and father, but others may be able to provide more details about his life as we go along. Philip had an unusual start. With 7 years of marriage and our graduate coursework behind us, we decided that the time during dissertation fieldwork in Cape Verde, while we were sure of insurance coverage, might be the time to have a child. With Phil in my belly, I set off for Cape Verde and was joined by Joseph a couple of months before our baby's birth. When I listened to Cape Verdean bands, Phil was already making his musical presence known with boisterous kicking to the beat inside of me. Philip was born by emergency C section, but he was a healthy, happy baby. We left Cape Verde when Philip was 6 months old, traveling to Germany to show him off to his Glowa grandparents before returning to the United States. We moved a lot during Philip's early life, but his grandparents' house in Potsdam, New York, and his extended Hurley family were constants in his life. He lived in Providence, Rhode Island, 1 year in Idaho, where his brother Tristan was born, 3 years in Erie, Pennsylvania, 2 years in Canton, and then 7 years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Our beautiful dog Marta was with us all the way along. Many summers during Phil's youth were spent in Europe or in the Adirondacks. In Lancaster, Phil made some good friends, like our neighbor Georgie from Puerto Rico, with whom he often made little films, and later Alex Thomas, Xander Gahn, and Hank Hoover, among others. Phil began playing the piano when he was 4 on his own, but he started taking classical lessons in Lancaster with Dr. Shun Pan. He learned easily, quickly memorizing short Bach works and progressing to longer pieces by Schubert and Beethoven. In about sixth grade, he came home from school one day and told us that he'd chosen to learn the bass in the school music program, and he took off on that instrument. He earned his first dollars at his Uncle Steve and Aunt Hanya's wedding reception, entertaining guests in line for the buffet with his piano playing, where he put out a cup for tips. In 2007, we had to find new jobs and leave Lancaster, which was a blow to us all. Joseph was quickly hired as a German professor at University of Alaska Fairbanks. We made the long trip with car and camper from Potsdam to Alaska, seeing many beautiful things along the way. Phil started school as a freshman at West Valley High School. It was a hard adjustment for him because he missed his friends in Lancaster, and life in Alaska was a big adjustment for all of us. Although this adolescent period was hard for Phil, he has said that he experienced the world most vividly then and felt at the height of his creative powers. He saw the new subarctic world through an aesthetic lens, finding patterns and beauty everywhere. He said that he tried in later life to recapture this wonder, but to his frustration, he could never quite get it back. Philip wasn't very interested in his school academic courses, but he began to create all kinds of music and visual artwork at home. He began to play in the West Valley Jazz Ensemble and Orchestra, and he took some bass lessons from Bob Olson and jazz lessons from Barney McClure. Phil was chosen to play the first movement of the Dragonetti Bass Concerto with the West Valley Orchestra, and he soloed with the jazz ensemble as well. Philip played one of his own piano compositions at the Alaska State Music Competition, and it was quite well received. Joe Scott allowed Philip to participate in the Fairbanks Summer Arts Festival after his junior year, and he thrived there, playing jazz with Barney McClure, Diamond Fuller, Greta Matassa, and Atsuko Peterson, and working in classical groups under Robert Franz. He also played in the Fairbanks Symphony Orchestra and Opera Fairbanks, but Phil realized he was ultimately more interested in jazz and electronic music than classical music. In high school, Phil also played in a punk band with Matt Harris and Bernie Bosa, and he became good friends with Logan Gottschalk, Eno Mackey, and Luke Nielsen, too. By the end of high school, he had found a kindred artistic spirit in Tegan White Nesbitt. Philip, lover of all creatures great and small, found it hard to make decisions about college and finally decided to enroll at UAF, initially studying film, but eventually completing degrees in Spanish and German with a minor in music. Phil spent his sophomore year in an exchange with SUNY Potsdam, where he played in one of the Crane jazz ensembles. The group performed one of his works. He became friends with Eliza Chappell in Potsdam and enjoyed being around his grandparents. The rest of the family joined me down in Brownsville for the year. We began to be concerned about Phil. In his early 20s, we arranged for him to see a health professional, and he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and prescribed medicine and counseling for it. He didn't respond well to counseling and tried on his own to find treatments that allowed him to still feel creative rather than numbing his overactive mind. We returned to Fairbanks and he became involved with Danica Clarion through UAF. She joined him during a study abroad semester in Madrid, Spain, and that's what you see in these pictures. During Phil's later years at UAF, he worked as music director at KSUA and he became good friends with Tara, Megan, Dominic, and musicians associated with a band named Fireweed Fiddle. Phil enjoyed the work at the radio very much, and he also began doing sound at the UAF pub. A night owl, he continued to share his electronic music and videos with friends near and far online. Phil worked with many local musicians and ensembles, including Clarence Pate, Diamond Fuller, and Atsuko. He especially loved playing with guitarist Ron Valise. Phil also played with the Fairbanks Community Jazz Band, UAF Jazz Ensembles, Emily Anderson, and at times with the bands Shag and Eating for Two. In 2018, we all went to Tristan's graduation from Yale. During the summer of 2019, Tara told Phil about her dip netting experience by boat on the Chitna River. We signed up too and drove 7 hours to Chitna with two cars and the camper. Phil and I were the fishermen and we caught our limit, some 50 big salmon. To his delight, Phil hauled in a king salmon. He was completely invested in the whole dip netting experience, including the fish processing that followed us back in Fairbanks. In January 2020, Phil joined me in Texas for a few months. We talked a lot. Phil was normally close lipped about his medical condition and health, but he did tell me how incredibly difficult it was for him just to get out of bed and function like most people. We did some horseback riding and spent time on the beach. Phil tried to find work doing sound in the area, but the virus changed our plans. We flew back to Alaska together at the beginning of March as the crisis got worse. During the early days of the pandemic, Phil went into full doomsday prepper mode, making long lists of survival supplies. One funny memory I have from that time concerns buying seeds at Fred Meyer's. Phil and I armed ourselves for the trip with masks, goggles, and gloves, and made a beeline for the seed racks inside the store. We quickly gathered up dozens of seed packages with little regard to what we were buying, while being closely observed by a store security guard who thought we were either total crazies or criminals in our get ups. Phil took responsibility for starting the seeds for our garden and helped us set up an improvised greenhouse. We had the best crops this year ever. Phil found a job at the Daily News Miner production room working the 4 to 10 p.m. shift and then stayed up at home until the wee hours most nights. He took both his job and the safety of his pod at home seriously. During the night, he communicated with friends online, played games, and slept much of the day. We all tried to get along peacefully under one roof during the pandemic. Philip was happy and funny at Christmas, and he was in a positive frame of mind in his last weeks. He'd lost some weight and was making some post pandemic plans. On his last day, we ate Sunday dinner together, and he and Tristan watched Star Trek until late in the night. When I found him at 7:30 in the morning, he had accidentally overdosed and couldn't be revived. Philip was a person who cared a lot for his friends, family, and for animals. He didn't intentionally hurt the ones he loved. We already miss him very much, and we hope that he is at peace.